We good to go? We're good? Good evening, everyone. It's 7 p.m. and
Recording in progress.
I'm calling the April 20th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. The meeting is being recorded. At this point, I'm going to call roll call, so when I call your name, will you please indicate that you're present? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Present.
Pat Norton,
Present.
Matt Hamill,
Present.
and Marnie Crouch, present. So I'm going to postpone board reorganization as a courtesy to the two applicants that are here for the site plan review matters. I have reviewed their applications, and I would ask Patrick whether or not the applications in each instance are complete, and whether or not the requisite notice for the public hearing is appropriate and in order.
Yes, they are complete. I do need to read the advertisement.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Okay. The Hamilton Planning Board will hold a site plan review on Thursday, April 20th, 2023, 7 p.m. at the Memorial Room at Town Hall, 577 Bay Road, Hamilton, and via Zoom in accordance with MGL Chapter 40A, Section 10, and the Hamilton zoning bylaw relative to a site plan review application for a change of use in order to convert existing first floor space, which was once a bank, to being a real estate brokerage office, and to add a sign at the shopping center at 15 Walnut Street, map 61, lot 51. The applicant is SSG Commercial LLC, 204 North Howard Avenue, Tampa, Florida. The property is within the B district of applications, and plans are on file and available for review at the Inspectional Services Office during regular hours, et cetera, et cetera. To your question, Madam Chair, yes, the application is thorough and complete. I do know that the applicant is here. He now owns, or his business, as I understand it, owned the entirety of the property. It used to be part ownership with Lisco Properties, but Alex is here. He'd like to introduce himself to the board.
Oh, please.
If you'd like to go to the podium.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Alex Golding. Like Patrick was saying, my family developed the center in 1958, Stuart S. Golding, with Stanley Lappin. We owned 50% of the center. Recently, Mr. Lappin sold all of his assets, and so we purchased part of the remaining part of this center. SSG Commercial it just stands for Stuart S. Golding Commercial. So we have shopping centers in Tampa, but my father and my grandfather are from Swampscott. So nice to meet everyone, and if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Do any board members have any questions regarding the change of entity at the Crosby's Marketplace Shopping Center?
What are you putting in?
A real estate brokerage, Jay Barrett.
Okay. So it's office use, basically.
Yes, office to office.
Office use, yeah.
Any other questions? I would entertain a motion to approve the application for the office in the Crosby's Marketplace. Oh, well, consistent with the public hearing notice that Patrick just read.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second?
When I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of this motion? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marty Crouch, aye. Sir, your application is approved.
So the next item is for an abbreviated site plan review. The Hamilton Planning Board will hold a site plan review on Thursday, April 20th, 2023, 7 PM in the Memorial Room, 577 Bay Road, Hamilton, and via Zoom in accordance with MGL 40A, Section 10, and the Hamilton zoning bylaw relative to a site plan review application to allow an attached roof to be constructed over an existing entrance to a medical offices building at 19 Railroad Avenue, map 61, lot 3-43. The applicant is David A. Cutter, Gloucester, Massachusetts. The property is within the B zoning district. And again, to your prior question, Madam Chair, the application is complete. Application of funds have been received, et cetera. So it's a thorough and complete application submitted to us. And as was described in the reading, it's a simple overhang to give a little bit of creature comfort to folks coming in and out of that office, or medical offices building.
Do any board members have any questions? Is Mr. Potter here or via Zoom?
No, he is not.
I have a couple questions. It would appear that the columns that hold up the porch are within, I don't know, 15 to 18 inches of the curb cut.
Sorry, Dave Cutter is on Zoom.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Cutter, do you want to present anything, or should I proceed with my question, then you can present and answer the question?
Should be able to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll let you proceed, and if you have any questions, please ask me.
Sure. So I noticed the columns are fairly close to the curbing edge, and I drove over there tonight, and I didn't notice there weren't any wheel stops adjacent to the curb. So I guess my only question or concern would be what the strategy might be to protect those columns against somebody hitting them with a vehicle, whether they're driving in forward or backward. There's a number of different solutions, but I just would like to hear what your thoughts are first.
So the architect, John Michaud, has suggested that we put the cement curbs, the curb stops out into the parking lot to keep the vehicles from hitting those upright columns.
Yeah, so you could do that. You could also, the second question is your overhang, your gutter is nearly in line with the curbing. And I know it's 7 or 8 feet up in the air, but if a box truck were back to back into the space, it would hit the building edge. So, so you've got sort of like there's a double question there. It's protecting the roof edge and protecting the columns. And, naturally it'd be building damage, and it would also potentially be a safety issue if one of those columns was knocked out, that they do look like they're supporting the roof.
Well, we could put bollards, the cement, they call them bollards out there. That's what I did out behind the Black Cow and a couple other parking lots, if you feel that's appropriate.
Yeah, you could do that. So that would be my only comment. Anybody else have any related comments, or?
would you suggest conditioning approval of the application on ensuring that those columns are protected from being destroyed by someone backing up or pulling forward unexpectedly and potentially causing injury?
Yeah, I'd say the columns are the most vulnerable. The hitting the eave would cause damage, but not as much as a safety issue,
Right.
so.
I mean, I think there is a safety issue. I mean, it doesn't happen often, but not infrequently. We do hear of people who are distracted, oftentimes elderly people who hit the gas instead of the brake and their car careens into a building. So I think it would be appropriate under these circumstances to condition approval of the application on making sure that those columns are secure, more secure from any type of vehicle collision.
I'm fine with that.
Great. Patrick, I assume that you will draft the paperwork that's
Yes.
required for this application. So would you put in a condition that those bollards be put in place?
Yes.
Okay, with that condition, I would entertain a motion.
I've got one question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize.
I've got a question on the sign that you're proposing, I guess, above the, on the new roof. Is that correct?
Yes, we're going to, the existing sign is on the building now, and it's proposed, the architect proposed putting it on angle brackets on the roof, the same sign, but just up on the roof.
So you're just going to pull it out and then structure it to the roof and brace it back for support?
Correct. Correct.
Are you
That's the
going to
plan.
light that sign?
There's, that's open for discussion. It's not, right now, there's a light on either side of the sign.
Yeah.
And I was going to reach out to Leahy if this got approved and ask them what their feelings were on that. But all of the lighting at that property right now is on a photocell, comes on at dusk, and then it shuts off at 11 o'clock. So if there was lightage on the sign, it would be on that same circuit that would shut that lighting sign off at 11 o'clock at night.
So that includes the lighting underneath the canopy there, underneath the new roof?
Yes, correct. That's already
Yeah.
on a time clock and a photocell. Everything, the big LED lights that light up the parking lot, all of that is on a photocell and a time clock.
Yeah. Okay. I do notice that the 7'1" dimension, which is from the top of the slab on the walkway to the bottom of the beam that supports the edge of the new roof, is a pretty short dimension there. I don't recall now what the code is, but I assume the architect has got it right. That's pretty low. But other than that, that's the only question I have.
So just to add to Emil's comment, another thing that could be done that would solve a whole bunch of issues is you could get that beam height higher, get the columns a little further away from the curbing edge, and get the gutter a little away from the curbing edge just by pulling the roof back a tiny bit, and it would protect everything a little better.
I actually suggested that to the architect. I said, why don't we move the columns back? The beam would go back and up, and he said that the sidewalk, the width between the beam and the building, the column and the building had to be a certain dimension. So I assumed he knew what he was talking about. But it seems logical to me that those columns would be pushed back, and that would eliminate a lot of these issues.
I think if you were to check that, I think you're not even close to what is too small
I would agree with that.
for a sidewalk. So I think that's a good suggestion. Pull the column back and columns back, and you
And
get
the roof back.
and the roof goes back with it, goes up. So you're going to solve a couple of problems, and it's a relatively easy change from a drawing standpoint.
Right. I agree.
And it would actually, I think, look better because the building looks crowded to the edge of the curbing. It would look more, natural if it was pulled back a little bit and be fine for the sidewalk width.
Do you happen to know what the width of the sidewalk needs to be? 4 feet or?
4 feet would be a minimum, but right now, from the building, you're 7'4" to the center line of the column. So you've got 7 feet clearance, so you could pull it in a foot,
A couple feet anyway, pull it in 2 feet.
Yeah, 1 or 2 feet.
1 or
probably
2
do it.
feet would do it, yeah. And it's,
I actually proposed that to the architect, so I'm gonna go back to him and tell him that that's what I want to do.
yeah, it's even wide enough for wheelchair and use and with a person, you know, and a wheelchair. So that would be adequate, I think. But
I'd prefer that than putting all the bollards in and the curb stops and stuff.
It would look better.
it look
Yeah.
better. Curb stops can be hazardous, too, for people coming in who are disabled in any way. They can be problematic. So,
Okay,
So should we make a conditional approval here, or should we wait for new plans?
That's a good question, Patrick. I'm going to defer to your expertise on that.
We could do either.
yeah.
You know, I think if the applicant was accepting of sending us new plans at 5 foot 6 inches, that would be acceptable for us as a condition and an approval as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because we'll know what it's going to look like without having to see everybody again. So
Right.
that makes
Rather-
sense.
Rather than having him
Yeah.
come back additional time.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure you want to specify that dimension for the architect who's
No,
designing.
I think he ought to check with his architect, who's got to sign off on this anyway, but I think that's going to be okay to do that. Pull it in as much as you can, without getting too close to the building. Like, don't get 3 feet from the building, but in the order, as Patrick said, 5.5 feet would be good.
You,
okay, so why don't we agree on 5.5 feet then?
Again, your
Put that in the condition.
Again, your architect should check all the conditions, door clearances, things like that.
Sure.
Right.
And then if you approve it based on that condition, then I will get a new set of plans to the planning board.
That sounds good. And if by any chance there's any issue, you can notify Patrick and we will reschedule the hearing on the application.
Okay? Sounds like a plan.
Okay? So I'll entertain a motion to approve the application subject to the condition of moving the columns as Jonathan suggested,
Columns.
And roof.
Roof.
and the roof, yes.
And a roof edge, yeah.
Do I have
Yeah,
such a
I'll-
motion?
Do we have the address on that?
Yes.
Emma, you want to make a
19
motion?
Railroad Ave.
I'll make it 19 Railroad.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion, Madam Chair, to 19 Railroad Avenue site plan review, that the board, planning board would like to make, approve the project with conditions, the conditions being that the new row of columns along the sidewalk, edge of the sidewalk, be repositioned closer to the building to allow the overhang to pull away from the edge of the slab below in the parking spaces, and the beam supporting the rafters would be then raised higher in the order of about 5 foot 6 inches from the face of the existing wall to the center line of the column. And also, we would request that the owner or the applicant here consult with his architect on that before doing the changes in the plans, and then to submit them to Patrick Raffett for final approval. But at this stage, it's kind of a long motion. Just a motion to approve with condition as stated.
Stated. Do I have a
Thank you.
second?
Second.
When I call your name, please indicate whether or not you approve of this motion. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Thank you, sir, for being so helpful, and
Oh.
I hope your architect approves of these proposed changes.
All right, thank you for approving it with a condition. Thank you.
You're
Have a
welcome.
good night. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At this juncture, I'm going to take board business out of order. And the first order of business is board reorganization. As everyone knows by now, we are honored to welcome Pat Norton as an official planning board member. And so because of that, we have the opportunity of electing a new chair and a new clerk. So I will entertain any discussion with respect to board reorganization.
Madam Chair, I'd like to nominate Marnie Crouch to remain as chair for the next year.
I second that.
Is there any discussion with respect to that? No
No
discussion?
discussion. No?
Well, thank you for the vote of confidence.
Should we vote?
So
we
we
vote,
should
or-
vote. So I think Emil as clerk, I will abstain, so you may call the roll as to who assents to that motion.
Okay, I'd like to take a voice roll call. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Beth Hur,
Beth, her aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Emil Dahlquist, aye. Congratulations. I guess.
Not sure
I'd like-
how to interpret all this, but, well, at this juncture, I'm going to make a motion because we also have to nominate a board member for clerk, and I nominate Emil Dahlquist as clerk. And I think he's done an absolutely extraordinary job with his work and certainly in assisting me. So do I have a second? for
Second.
that motion?
Second.
Any discussion? This is very easy. So when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of this motion? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Beth Hur,
Beth, her aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye, and I'm assuming
I will
Emil,
abstain.
that you're abstaining.
Good job,
But
Emil.
anyhow,
I should say,
It's a
congratulations.
close call.
maybe we should say condolences?
Yeah.
Correct. So we do have other board business, and at this point, I want to welcome Darcy Dale. She has submitted an application to be appointed an associate member of the planning board, and I don't think Darcy needs much of an introduction. She served on the FinCom and also on the Select Board, and I also know that she has been clerk of both the FinCom and the Select Board, so she is very familiar with reviewing minutes and that kind of thing. So I have just two questions for you,
Yes.
Darcy. One, and you can answer them seriatim. One, what motivated you to apply? And two, this is my question, my serious question, whether if your nomination is approved and the Select Board and the Planning Board jointly approve you, whether if you are approved, you would spearhead our efforts with respect to producing and editing minutes, because we have a serious problem with the absence of minutes. We've been hampered by not having people in the role of taking minutes the way Mary Alice did for the Select Board for years and years. And so if you would take over that responsibility, you would get my vote, and if I could multiply it by 100, I would. So please.
Yes.
to
Well,
answer
first of
my
all,
question.
thank you for considering me for this position. And yes, I would be happy to do that because I actually am a stickler for transparency. And, it helps maintain our democracy. I am also a stickler for communication, the more the better. So I would be happy and would I'm also really good at attending meetings. I have a very good attendance record, so yes, I would definitely be pleased to do that.
Thank you. Do any board members have more questions for Darcy?
Well, I think, I think Marnie asked, like, what prompted you to?
Well, I've been involved in public service. It actually is part of my family's history. And it was an opening that I thought, well, why not? I have institutional knowledge. I've lived here for a long time. I plan on staying until I am no longer. And I just thought it would be very interesting. And I do want to make sure that we communicate to the public about what's happening. And so I thought I would be someone that would be able to help do that.
Does anyone else have any questions for Darcy? Well, I will entertain a motion to approve Darcy as an associate member and recommend her to the Select Board for their consideration as well.
So moved.
Seconded.
So when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of this motion? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Darcy, I will write a letter on your behalf.
Thank
And I
you.
really thank you for your offer to take care of these minutes because,
You guys are doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's really amazing how you're all working so well together, and I just am so amazed and impressed, and I would love to be part of the team. So
right.
thank
Oh,
you.
great, thank you. We have additional board business. We are, I believe, obligated to select a representative to attend CPC meetings. And, candidly, I don't know how often the CPC meets, but
Generally about once a month.
once a month.
Yeah,
okay.
as they get into the mode of reviewing applications for CPC funding, they do meet more often than once a month, so they can evaluate those applications.
Do you know what day of the week they meet?
I believe it's Thursdays.
Do I have a volunteer to be the planning board's representative to the CPC?
I can't do it.
No volunteers?
Don't look at me, I'm already chair of another committee.
I thought maybe you were going before the CPC. No.
No funding that wouldn't qualify.
Okay, I was
Joking.
not joking.
I got it.
Bill or Pat?
Not Thursdays, I'm just busy.
Coaching lacrosse.
Beth?
Thursdays are hard for me too, so I might be able to do something after the fall. But I work a lot at night, especially in the summer.
Is it necessary for us to have one representative, or could we rotate the obligation?
I would think that you could rotate.
Well, maybe that's what we'll have to do, because, obviously, everyone on the planning board is super busy, and so if I don't have a volunteer to do that, could Matt Hamill do it, an associate member? Could he? I don't.
Sure.
Oh, he could? Mr. Hamill,
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
how would you like to volunteer to attend CPC meetings once a month?
I believe I heard someone say it's about once a month on typically Thursdays.
Yes.
Sure, I can volunteer for that, and perhaps in the event I'm not able to make it, I'll send out an email to Patrick or see if I can get somebody to cover me, just in case I have a work obligation at night. But I can volunteer for that.
That would be fabulous. And obviously, the planning board is not going to be seeking money from the CPC. So it's
Sure.
really just attending the meetings. Probably, I don't know if they have their meetings via Zoom. You could probably attend via Zoom and just report back to the planning board about any kind of activity that the CPC is considering or funding that the CPC is considering that may affect board business. So thank you for that, Matt. I really appreciate that.
Happy to help. Thank you.
Do we need to make a motion to approve him as a representative, Patrick?
Yes, we should do that as a vote.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve Matt Hamel as the planning board's representative to the CPC.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
When I call your name, would you please indicate that you assent to the motion? Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Abel Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Har, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
and Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Matt, thank you very much for agreeing to do that. It's, I think it'll be interesting for you, and it really will help the board tremendously if you do that. And again, if by chance you can't make a meeting, just advise Patrick, and he can send around an email so another member can attend.
Absolutely. Happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. So with respect to board business, we also have the minutes from August 30th, 2022 to review, the minutes for September 20th and October 11th that Joan Delamore prepared. I have yet to review. I have obviously been kind of engaged with the Gordon Conwell issues. So we do have, though, the August 30th minutes, and I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to review them.
Are those the ones that came today?
Yeah.
I can state that Joan sent me those minutes, and she highlighted the names of board members that she was unsure whether they were the speaker. So I actually went through, I had to, and watched the YouTube video. She just couldn't recognize planning board members, so she not infrequently was unsure who was speaking. So I did go through those minutes and made the corrections that I deemed appropriate. So those minutes actually are in quite good shape, with the exception that I note that there has to be a line there that those minutes were submitted by Joan and for approval with a date. So that was the only omission that I noted. So did anybody have any comments?
I did read through those minutes, and other than little tiny typos that were of no consequence, I had no problems with it.
Yeah, I did the same.
Very detailed.
So I was focusing on the content, the meaning and content, and not worrying so much about micro typos.
Right. Has everyone had a chance to read them? I mean, if not, we can defer approval of those minutes until such time as Darcy, I hope, will be able to take a look at the 2 additional minutes that Joan prepared. So you can confess if you didn't read all 29 pages or whatever of those minutes. It was a small novel.
Well, I didn't get, because I got it today, I hadn't had a chance to read through the whole thing.
I confess I have not read them.
So we will defer approval of those minutes, I think, and that way, Jonathan, if you want to send me a note with respect to the typos, I can fix them.
Certainly.
So, Patrick, is there any other board business that we need to attend to?
Let's see. Rick, did you want to update folks on the discussion last night from the HDC?
Well, let's see. Everybody, well, we had 3 members there, Marty, Emil, and Jonathan, including myself. We had
somewhere between 35 and 40 people attending the session, briefing session on the concept plan for new sidewalks from Linden down Bay Road to the pool, up Asbury to Willow, Willow to Linden, and Railroad Avenue, and across Bay Road. We got some good comments and observations about concerns, especially along the intersection of Asbury and Bay Road, and the alternates for consideration in improving traffic flow there. But in general, I think people were enthusiastic about new sidewalks and pedestrian safety improvements and bicycle lanes. It's predicated on the town receiving a grant from MassWorks, and it's a highly competitive grant, so we probably, I would say there's a 50-50 chance we'll receive funding at least in this round, but it will spur the discussion of integrating some innovative upgrades and techniques for improving traffic and parking, and Patrick was there discussing parking study and implementing parking improvements on Railroad and Willow. So that's pretty much it.
I got the impression that the consultant that the HTC engaged was quite experienced and had a lot of experience interacting with
Yeah,
the powers that be.
Yeah, that's why we hired them, because they have a great track record, and they've got landscape architects, civil engineers, traffic engineers, planners, so they take an integrated, holistic view of whatever the challenge is. So the next one is to take those comments and then develop the pre-engineering for the application. And as they said, this doesn't lock it in, but we have to be as specific as possible, because the MassWorks is looking for shovel-ready projects. And we have a tight deadline of June 2nd to get that engineering and done and the application submitted. And if it's, so we'll find out in the fall whether we were successful or not.
That's good. Any other board business?
One other thing, the Master Plan Steering Committee is going to be working with their consultant and conducting a Zoom public engagement effort on May the 17th. Again, that'll be a Zoom attendance engagement meeting. As more information comes to me, I'll get that out to the board members. But I suspect the majority of it will be basically a recap of the information that the inventory process and editing process has provided us so far.
Right. Do you know whether there are monies available so that the Judy Barrett and her colleagues can provide the town with some recommendations? So they've done existing conditions, but existing conditions in and of themselves don't translate into actual recommendations as how to implement some of the concerns of the citizens that were expressed at the workshop that was held in the
One of
winter.
the major things that, as we changed consultants, it sort of pushed us back financially into the predicament where Judy Barrett didn't have, she felt, in the amount of money we had available, the ability to do the final element that makes this a real master plan, and that's the implementation element. So I have asked the town manager, I've asked the Chair of the Board of Selectmen to consider providing us with additional resources to be able to consummate that full scope. That gives us that implementation element. She has advised me it'll be 35,000, which I forwarded that on to Sean and the town manager. So they're considering that.
Would it be helpful if the planning board were to write to the chair of the select board and the town
Absolutely.
manager?
Absolutely.
Then we should undertake that effort. Because obviously, the planning board is probably, of all the boards and departments in town, the one that would spearhead a lot of the recommendations that were in that implementation section. And obviously, since the last master plan was 2004, we could benefit from any wisdom that she would have.
Right. Not only that, by state law, Massachusetts expects local planning boards to maintain an up-to-date master plan in its completeness. So we kind of need to do that, which is why I had made that request of those two individuals, so we could get this ball rolling, get it consummated, so we have a full product.
Right, we don't want to lose the head of steam from May 17th.
It's too important an exercise and work effort to not consummate the full product.
Is there a draft copy of that somewhere maintained, like to what's been developed to date?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, all of the edits that have come from the committee are being fine-tuned into the text right now. I should have a copy of that from the consultant either late tomorrow or on Monday. So when I get that, I will send it obviously to the Master Plan Steering Committee, but I'll send that to the planning board members as well.
Great. I thought that the chapters that I reviewed were well done, and I think that the work product will certainly be quite professional when it's completed. So I think it would be a missed opportunity not to consummate this master plan in accordance with state law. So do any other board members have any business to bring up? I will ask you, Pat, whether you've been in touch with Alec Wishart about the stormwater management amendments to the
I connected with
bylaw.
him after the previous meeting, we spoke about it, and then I've since gathered some information that I'll connect with him on probably early next week. Been looking at various obviously with Bridge Street in consideration, other mechanisms, not necessarily maybe part of the stormwater, but associated with, like tree removal, permitting, earth disturbance or earth removal. You know, the EPA requirements is 1 acre, but you look at other towns like Beverly and Essex and other places, and they're more restrictive than that. But I don't obviously want to create more burden on the board and everyone for no reason, but some ideas coming through with some help from some civil engineering friends. But I'll be proposing some things for discussion next week to the
Right, yes, and it's something that we should focus on and devote, a significant portion of a meeting to addressing those amendments.
Yeah.
I think that all of us know that we have started to receive some letters from the abutters to the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary property, and they refer to the Bridge Street lots as a debacle, and unfortunately, that seems to be the case. But it highlights the pitfalls of drafting bylaws and how there seems to always be the case unprovided for. So even though we have had a provision for a common plan of development or sale, there was no corresponding enforcement provision relating to that.
Right.
So I think I will just say this in the event that any citizens are here regarding the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary overlay district, that the planning board is well aware of those circumstances, and any bylaw or overlay district that we would propose would be vetted as carefully as humanly possible to avoid pitfalls that would tend to crop up years after the fact. So we want to, whatever product we come up with, we want to really look at it from every conceivable lens. So at this juncture, we will turn to a brief.
Actually, just wanted to, because we did get a lot of comments about, seems like people, a lot of people definitely on Bridge Street, but I guess I just also state that, Conservation Commission, abutters, people on the road, if they're seeing a public hazard, or if they're, having some concern about their own property adjacent, I mean, it's, a building permit is the jurisdiction right now on the, and really reaching out to the building inspector with any concerns, and the building permit that they hold is really the only mechanism right now to
Yeah, to hold up a building permit until
make sure that they're, maintaining a safe and well tidied up site.
Right. I mean, I've driven by there and kind of been a little bit,
It is also the most
I don't want to say
dangerous-
horrified, but concerned. The soils don't appear to be,
Madam Chair, there was a hand raised. I don't know whether we want to take anything from the public on this.
sure.
Here we go. Nancy. She should be able to talk.
I'm Nancy Dashkin, and I am one of the abutters at the Gordon Conwell Seminary site. And I don't know whether you've read my letter yet, but it was pretty vituperative and pretty pervasive, and we're really upset. And yes, I'm very concerned. And yes, the Bridge Street situation, which I drive by daily, makes me wonder what didn't happen there that needs to happen as you consider the Gordon Conwell property. But we have been following every move you're making. And it isn't that we're silent. We're just waiting, and we're assembling, and we're concerned. So I just wanted to make sure you understand that, because this is not something that's easy, and we understand, but it is also something that needs to be carefully developed. And up until now, we haven't seen that care. Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to address just very briefly some of the letters that we've received, and also speak to the documents that appear on the Planning Board's webpage. I just want to let everyone know that the Planning Board has not finalized anything. We are in an information gathering phase. We have produced documents and maps. They are for discussion purposes. The consultants that were engaged by the seminary and the town just today submitted their final report as to various development scenarios and the amount of revenue that each scenario would produce. And the planning board has used that information, and we will be pleased to see the final product, as a springboard for its own discussions. But one thing the consultants did not do, two things the consultants did not do. One, they never provided the planning board with any type of synopsis of the feedback that they got from the abutters at the abutters meeting, or the comments that were made by the public at the various workshops. And the second thing that the consultants didn't do is they did not evaluate or explore the intensity of the development that the citizens of Hamilton would feel comfortable with on the site. So To the abutters, I just want to assure you that no decisions have been made, and the planning board, at one of its meetings, I believe it was January 4th, when we articulated various preferences that we would like to see for the site. One of the first preferences that we determined was that there should be a perimeter buffer around the site. And that perimeter buffer is specifically for the benefit of the abutters. And I have personally been drafting a bylaw. It is a very rough draft. I have not shared it with planning board members, but I have been looking at different bylaws, and Emil has provided me with some good examples. And one of the provisions that I've been looking at specifically are buffers and how to handle them. So that is one thing that the planning board is very much aware of, because it has such an impact on the abutters. And also, the other thing that is potentially quite impactful is lighting. So the planning board has an obligation to hear from the public, and I want to explore with planning board members tonight about the possibility of moving our planning board meetings to the Hamilton Wenham Library so that we could accommodate significantly more people, have a much larger screen that everyone could look at simultaneously, and we could hear directly from the abutters, from the seminary, and from any other people in town. And I can assure you that the one thing the planning board does not want to do is to draft a bylaw that's dead on arrival. And a bylaw that ignores the interests of the abutters and does not take into consideration the concerns of the citizens and the seminary is likely to be dead on arrival. And this effort is much more complicated, I think, than anyone realized. There are a lot of provisions that have to go into this bylaw. And then, as I said, with reference to the stormwater management bylaw, we have to then, once we get public input and we're ready to say it's final, then we have to stop and look at it from every single angle to make sure that we have not inadvertently done something that will come back to haunt us or haunt the town in the future. So, again, I don't want anyone to feel that there's any kind of imminent threat to their property rights at this point in time. It's a complicated process, and we really have not heard from the abutters and the citizens. They appeared at workshops with the consultants, but the planning board itself has not had direct communication from you except those letters. And I just wanted to assuage your concerns at this point. That the planning board is not out there trying to harm anyone at this point. So with those remarks in mind, does anyone else have any comments to make?
I would just like to add that in terms of posting things on the town website, it would be useful to possibly position them a little bit so that if something's a draft, it's labeled as a draft, and also it would be, I think, useful to attribute documents to the party that produced them. So if it's from the planning board, it's attributed to the planning board. If it's from the consultants, it's attributed to the consultants. If it's from Gordon Conwell or somebody other party, that it's attributed, so that folks can see all the different stakeholders who are putting together information to be then discussed and vetted publicly, so that when folks look at things on the website, they're in context, is what I would request that we try to figure out how to do.
Did anyone else have any comments?
Yes, and receiving the final report from the consultants today, I made a suggestion to the steering committee that it consider funding a final public session where the entire process is reviewed and discussed to actually set the stage of how we got to where we are, because I think that outside of probably a handful of people, primarily the abutters, who've been paying attention, most people don't really have a good grasp of the entirety of the effort that's going on, not only from the consultants, but from what the planning board has been wrestling with over the last 9 months. So, and I think that would go a long way to help set the table, have people understand why we are where we are and how we got there, and engender probably a more hopefully rational discussion about the options that we're looking at and considering.
Well, keep us apprised of that. I would say, though, that at least in terms of the map for the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary site, I think the planning board has gone beyond what David Gamble did with his campus plan clusters. So I think we're have a more sophisticated understanding of how the site should be organized. Certainly, I think that Barry Abramson's scenario should be considered by the town, because those scenarios do show a level of intensity of development that the town folk should be aware of. And that may be something that will engender comments and/or concerns. So does
I have a question. So when you suggested that we move to the library, is that before the public hearings or for the public hearings?
I'm suggesting we move to the library to have public hearings, but not the public hearings that are required by state law.
That's what, so
That would
yeah.
have to be noticed in newspapers of general circulation.
So just allowing people to come and share
Yes, it
in
should-
public. I like it.
Yes,
Yep.
because I think that at this juncture, we don't even have a draft of an overlay district, so there is no purpose being served by noticing out a public hearing in accordance with state law. That would be a wasted effort. But I think that moving to a venue that's larger would have its benefits. And I did call the librarian today, and I did learn that the library is available on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and the limitation is that a meeting would have to be concluded by 7:45. So if the planning board were to have any type of a meeting, a program to advise the public as to where we are and whether that was with or without the consultants, we would have to schedule that ideally as soon as possible, or a month in advance, and have a different start time. How do the members feel about moving to the library for some type of a meeting?
Well, I think it's an important thing to do, and I'd be very much in favor of that going forward. And in that, along those lines, we had talked earlier about, we being you and I, about having an informational, or what we refer to as an active listening session with the abutters, with the public there, and for the purpose of getting information which we have not received yet from the consultant. I don't see a point in getting the consultants back, to be honest, because I think we have their information. We can now assess what that brings to the discussion around preparing the overlay district code. So I think, but I think having that public session there in meetings that involve feedback, so there'd be a subsequent meeting and maybe a third meeting, so you have two feedbacks. So just that we have a chance then to update the code, go back to the people and say this is what has been done or suggested, we get feedback at that point, and then one-third time.
Right, and I want to say, too, that it would be an opportunity for the seminary representatives to be present as well, so that if people had questions for the planning board, we could answer them, but also there could be an exchange of views between the abutters, citizens, and seminary representatives and the planning board. So it could be a real opportunity for an exchange of ideas. And I think really, in large part, we have to, figure out, the level of intensity of development on this site. Because right now, I think it was Jonathan might have mentioned this, the site is underlighted. So when I drove by there one evening, I was surprised at how dark that site is. But if you start, considering development options, there would be standards that would have to be met for lighting buildings and parking lots and whatnot. So the site would be transformed accordingly. And again, I mentioned lighting as being very important. But these are all areas where public input is really critical. And I will also say that at town meeting, I mentioned this, and I'll mention it again. One of the goals of the planning board is to balance the fiscal, environmental, and social benefits associated with the development and potential reuse of buildings on this site. We want to balance those interests, not one particular interest, say fiscal interest should predominate over any others. So I hope that these comments will give some of the people who have been writing letters some confidence that your planning board has not gone rogue. So you could be part of this process, and there has never been any intention to silence your voices.
Do we know the capacity? How many people could we handle?
About 100.
And would we have HW Cam? Would they be able to?
Yes, they would.
Okay, perfect.
So HW Cam was there at the
HTC, okay, perfect.
meeting last night. And
Excellent.
so the beauty of that room is that the chairs are arrayed so everyone can see this very large screen, whereas here in the memorial room, if we have an audience, their backs are to the screen. So it's a much better venue for communicating than the memorial room.
Well, and I feel like it goes along with what Richard was saying about getting people. The more people we expose, I think the more people you get on board, so that when we do bring it to town meeting.
Right. Well, the feedback that we get can be incorporated into the bylaw. We're not drafting in a vacuum.
Madam Chair, there's another hand up.
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Barnes.
Hello, Madam Chair and Planning Board. I just wanted to interject one thing, if I may. I wouldn't want anyone who is tuning in to their first meeting, listening to the conversation that just took place, to get the impression that the abutters have in any way been eliminated from the conversation. On the contrary, we have had multiple meetings with abutters. We have had public meetings with abutters, private meetings with abutters. The consultants had public meetings with the abutters. All of the concerns of the abutters have been baked into the final report that has come from the consultants. And every meeting I've attended on Zoom with the planning board, never has the planning board not mentioned, rightfully so, the concerns of the abutters. So I just would like to make it very clear that we are more than happy to continue to involve the abutters as well as the rest of the community at large in these conversations. Thank you.
Great, I appreciate that, and I think that these conversations do have to continue for a while to make sure that the work we do is transparent and we have the benefit of everyone's voice, including your own, Dr. Barnes. Any more comments?
Yeah, I'm going to this is where Emil and I will have a slight disagreement. We need to set the table for the general public, and at the 2 community house meetings, there were close to 100 people. Maybe a third of them were abutters. The rest were public at large, who have a very strong interest in the outcome of the planning effort that we're undertaking. And I think it behooves us to set the table for not only the abutters, but also the general public, in providing a final session to present the results and assessment, and set the table by showing them how we are using the information provided by the consultants to develop the process and the elements of a potential bylaw, so that there's a full picture and shows continuity, consistency, and competence on the behalf of the board in getting to where we are. Because what happens here is that people get snippets. They'll see something, they'll see a map, and I'll speak to that. We need to be a little bit more careful about what we post. I was looking at the website, and it shows the highest density map that was developed by Jonathan and Emil, but it doesn't have the low and medium maps. Well, if you look at that and it goes, well, that's the only map they're considering. So the message that we send is, it's critical, and the public process that the public sees is critical to building credibility for this board. So, and understandably, the abutters are going to be very concerned, as they should be, because it's going to potentially have the greatest impact. But not only abutters have been paying attention. You know, I bet a handful have, and they obviously formed some opinions I don't think that are warranted, given the level of effort that this board has put forth. So clearly, we aren't communicating well. There's clearly a miscommunication going on already, and if we don't rectify that, then it's only going to become more confrontational and less productive. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, we will explore whether or not there are monies available to have the consultants make a presentation, so that would be step one. And,
Yes.
Certainly, if that were to be the case, then the planning board can also indicate or make a presentation as to how we
Right.
have
I-
used their information
Right.
to carry.
Show them a coherent flow of how we got there, because we don't have anything to hide. And I think everybody has been working very hard, Jonathan and Emil especially, in developing a very thoughtful, carefully reasoned layout of potential uses within the property that protects the natural beauty of the property, and really does an excellent job of considering how it could be thoughtfully developed. I don't know what else we could be doing to develop a thoughtful plan that takes into consideration all the elements that you described about.
Right. I agree, and I do have a suggestion, kind of riffing on what Jonathan said. Perhaps on the town's webpage, we can indicate what documents were produced by what entity, but also have a caveat, you know, for a full understanding of what's transpiring. You know, search YouTube and you can watch the planning board hearings if you have 3 hours of free time. But that will give you the entire picture of what we are doing. And so we're really working quite hard to honor the wishes and balance the concerns of all the constituencies. I mean, it's not, it's by no means an easy task, and once you start in it, you go, wow.
The one thing I'd like to reiterate is on the website, if something is final, that's great. It could be labeled final, but nothing that is a draft should be labeled as final, and it should, ideally, everything should be labeled draft unless it's been voted into action.
Right, and my recollection is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we took one vote, and that was to eliminate the underlying zoning district, which we now know is the GPOD, and then we did indicate some preferences and some maps to use as a starting point for further activity, but we are by no means at a point where our minds can't be changed, put it that way. Would people agree with that assessment?
I don't think we have a choice.
Of course you do. Nothing's, fully baked yet.
Is so the agenda item, I guess the description in the agenda topic we're in right now is to discuss, but is there like an action, are we on an action tonight to make any decision or progress towards?
The one thing that I wanted to do tonight is very briefly, because I want to finish up so we can go into executive session, is have Emil just describe some of the tables that he's produced. Not that we can discuss them, we will discuss them at a later time, but since you're seeing it for the first time, if he just gives us a synopsis of what he has tried to do, then at another future meeting, we can dive into it a little further and make any comments, corrections, changes, or whatever.
So before we jump to that, do we want to set a date on when we wanted to do library
We will explore that. It would have to be in May, and I don't have my calendar right in front of me.
Our two meetings that we have currently scheduled in May are for May the 2nd and May the 16th.
So probably May 16th would be the most practical date to shoot for, and also the most likely date that we could get the room reserved. So I will follow up on that. And
if I might say for a second, since I wasn't a butter for 30 years, I've had my ears chewed off in the last 2 weeks. Because I know a lot of people, and I really think the seminary did not do themselves any favors by developing the 10 lots along Bridge Street. The people are just petrified driving by that, looking up the enormous amount of dirt excavation into the hill. The town has now put, very heavy rock crushing all along the roadside next to the hill because they're anticipating runoff. I mean, they just scared the bejesus out of everybody. Now, I know that we want to make sure and make it clear that what we have in front of us now has no connection to that. That is a separate thing, as in some ways horrendous as it may be. And I have to tell people it was beyond our control. We tried, but we had no jurisdiction over those, and we do have jurisdiction over the rest of the hill, but you can see how that's difficult for people to understand and appreciate, right?
Right, it's the most visual, and it's
what you see is,
Right, no, I get it. It's an abomination.
It's difficult.
To add to Bill's comment, I think what's really important for the public to understand and the board to remember is that if we don't continue embarking on what we're trying to do here, which is find the balance, of protection and development and, the three interests of community and fiscal and environment in balance, if we don't do that, if we do nothing, that entire site runs the risk of looking like Bridge Street. That's really important.
Right.
If we do nothing, if we stop, that we can't just ignore that site, or the whole site could look like Bridge Street. So our effort, whatever the outcome, is working toward avoiding Gordon Conwell being a repeat of the 9 Bridge Street lots. That's so important.
Right.
So important.
That's a very good way of
So
putting it. That now that we have jurisdiction, it's our goal, not to repeat Bridge Street.
Right, it's to get it right, because we found out with Bridge Street that our bylaw was inadequate to address the problem. And so we really have to vet whatever work product we come up with. And I said to Emil, once we get a final draft, we're a third of the way there. We have to have public input, and we have to really scrutinize it to see what the pitfalls are.
Right.
What scenario could arise that would cause this bylaw to be ineffective? So there's a lot going into it, in addition to just coming up with a draft. And I've also mentioned that we have to go and look at all the other bylaws that could be implicated by the addition of a new overlay district.
Well, and
So-
I, just as Jonathan was saying, like, when I was reading those emails today, I thought that was great to be getting the input, and I also thought the same thing he was just saying is, like, do they know, like, I wouldn't have known necessarily what the other option is, which is basically developing like Bridge Street, and just having that whole land and not the open space. So I think, like, having those conversations are good, because, they're coming with what they're concerned about, and then, I don't know if everybody always knows what the give and take is, so.
Okay, thank you. Well, Emil, if you could just quickly run through these documents, I do want to finish up by 8:30 so that we can.
8:30, okay.
We're a couple hands resulting from
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ken
we'll
probably
take us,
All right, yeah. I don't know, John's hand was up before Ken's, but I can maybe ask John to speak quickly.
I apologize, my vision is such that I can't see the hands, so I have to rely on Pat.
I think both John.
I'm afraid I have to take exception with Mr. Barnes, or Divinity Dr. Barnes' comments about the Gordon Conwell wishing to take into consideration the butters' concerns. At one point, when Mr. Sundquist invited or wanted to have a meeting with us, I invited a couple of neighbors, and I thought, well, hell, if there are a couple of neighbors coming, why not invite more so we can kill more birds with one stone, collectively and collaboratively and together. I was specifically told by Gordon Conwell to disinvite the neighbors I invited. So this rhetoric about compatibility and wanting to deal with us, it sounds very, very hollow indeed. That's all I have to say.
Are there any other hands up?
Ken had put his hand up again.
Yes.
And could
Yes,
people speak up?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. The situation that John just referenced happened before this process, where we agreed that we were going to come together and find a mutual result. So I just want to clarify that. But more importantly, I'd just like to correct something that Bill said, and I think he said it inadvertently. He said the seminary developed the Bridge Street lots. The seminary did not develop the Bridge Street lots. The seminary sold that property to a developer, who then went through the normal process of developing the lots. And I agree 100%. One of the main reasons why we agreed, we volunteered and invested money in this process, is because we don't want to see the campus look like that either. In fact, I would remind everyone that there is a very high probability that we may choose to stay on a large portion of that property. This is a right sizing exercise for us. So we are operating in good faith and in goodwill to find a mutually beneficial solution for everyone. So that's all I'll say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emil, any other hands up?
There was just a couple comments on the Q&A, but no more hands.
Were they questions or just comments?
Where can we see a written summary of the process to date and going forward?
Read the minutes. Watch the YouTube video.
Well, back to answer that for just a second, I believe it's possible for us to post things on the website that have more of a summary character to them. Whereas right now, I feel what's posted on the website is kind of out of context bits and pieces, which if I were an abutter, I would be alarmed.
Patrick, though, you could post the final report of the consultants. That's
Yes,
certainly
yes,
something
we
that-
can do that tomorrow. I've sent that to the person who takes care of that part.
What was the other
So
comment?
if there are other elements that board members feel like need to be presented there in the rest of the Gordon Conwell information, please get those to me as you would like to see them portrayed. I don't want to be misinforming anyone or, leading people to think things out of context.
Well, one thing that might help is a one-page timeline that, basically summarizes engagement starting in discussions with the seminary and the town, starting really back in August, hiring a independent, objective consulting team, and then going through the meetings, and then, it doesn't need to be long, just sort of shows a series of events so that people know what's been happening. And you can say in, a number of public meetings and the number of discussions that this board has had over the last 6 months, 5 months, specifically focused on how to protect that piece of property while developing it thoughtfully, sustainably, taking into consideration the elements that the public guiding principles the public mentioned, as well as those of the planning board. So at least there's some context that there's a process going on over time. Because again, my biggest fear is people plug in, all of a sudden they see something and they go, oh, well, this is what's happening. And I haven't, and it's too much, too fast, too soon, and I haven't been consulted. And there's no public process. Well, that's not true. So we've got to be very careful about making sure that, and this is important for documenting as we have public discussions, we can say, listen, here's what we have done over time. And we have documented that over time so that we substantiate our efforts and we have a track record. And so what I don't want to have happen, and what many times happens is, and I understand this is an emotional issue for people, is that they hear things second or third hand, or the planning board becomes the villain because of some issue. And I want to make sure that we're on solid ground, that we have dotted our I's, crossed our T's in each step of the way, and demonstrate and can document that we are doing the people's work, and we are listening, and we have engaged in a very thoughtful process that is taking into account the abutters and the general public and all the issues that go with it.
Would you be able to do that?
Big mouth, right? I should have kept my mouth shut.
Actually, we're halfway there, because before the town meeting, we prepared a timeline. And that was sent to everyone as a Word document. I could forward it to you.
Yeah, would you?
Remember, you were indicated you wanted to add some information
Yeah,
about
okay.
Harbor Light. So I have that.
All right, send it to me.
I have that.
I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah, if you find it, you might find it in your email, but I can forward it to you if
Yeah.
I can find it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we could, I could take a look at it, and we could get that posted. But you have a little bit of inside information about some of the working group meetings as well. So it wouldn't really be
No,
too
that's
much
fine.
work. Thank you.
Pat, was
Appreciate
there
that.
another
So let's
comment?
just quickly take more questions.
There was one more comment,
There's
I think.
actually two. I think Nancy came back, but Annie's got her hand up first.
And did you want to finish the comments
Oh,
first?
Sure. I think Annie's got her hand raised.
Could you read it? Oh, I'm sorry.
While the abutters are very aware of the project, folks in town are not generally aware of the details of the project. This will have, by definition, a major impact on town, greater level of publicity of the plans, and feedback sessions be quite important if you really want the townspeople to be broadly aware. I could also have paralysis by analysis too. Probably making sure that the website's up to date with only relevant information and not really how, there's a lot of information on there right now about like how we're getting there.
Right, and that's
If you're
the
looking at it, you
process.
get confused very easily because it's not a project, it's not a development, it's a zoning agreement, right? This is, I think, where some confusion lies, and maybe being
There's
able to clarify that would help.
And
But
what they're saying is there's not a clearly defined narrative to tell the people a story of how we have proceeded. They get bits and pieces of information. They go to the website and they say, okay, well, there's those documents, but what's the context?
All right, well, Annie's got her hand raised here, so she may want to add to what she wrote. What can I say? Allow her to talk. She should be able to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for all of your efforts. I'm in a butter on Miles River Road. You know, what I'm observing, I'm relatively new to the town. I've lived here for about 18 months. And, you know, what I've observed from listening to the last couple of planning board meetings is that, you know, you all are extremely thoughtful and extremely diligent. And I think, you know, you're sort of thinking everything through. And I think there's just this has been alluded to, but, you know, I think there's a real asymmetry of information where you all are so deep in the weeds in the process. And I think the rest of us are just sort of trying to catch up and understand what's happening. And I just want to reiterate that I really think it would behoove everybody if you could write that summary document. You know, there may be, you know, hours and hours of video and you know, but we don't frankly have the context expertise or time to assimilate all of that. So the more that you can share about what you all have done to date and what the plans are going forward, what opportunities we'll have to contribute to share our perspectives, you know, not just as abutters, but other key stakeholders in the process, I think it will engender a lot of good faith and result in a much more, a higher level of trust and a much better outcome for everybody.
So, Madam Chair, if I could respond to that a little bit. What I think might be useful is the timeline is really put through our lens, not through an abutter's or layperson's lens. So what could be useful, and maybe Rick will volunteer to do this, is to take our timeline and just explain it in really, really simple language for the casual viewer to understand what's the big picture here. So just make it accessible. So Rick, are you volunteering for that?
And make it accessible in the fewest number of words.
Absolutely.
In the shortest possible way.
Absolutely, like a New Yorker cartoon.
You're
Volunteering?
You get a chance to edit this?
Yes.
And I was thinking back to Jonathan's comment earlier, it's just like the first thing, basically clearly state what the underlining zoning is and what we would be left with if we don't have.
If we do nothing.
Yeah, correct. I think that's a really important starting
That's
place.
a starting point.
That's
If we
a
do
really
nothing,
important starting point, because the consensus, the erroneous consensus, was that this was an R1B site, when actually Emil discovered that because of the wetland and the wellhead protection district, the site actually is within the GPOD. So, you know, that's a real twist. But yes, I think that posting that type of timeline would be helpful, and try and assess kind of the focus of each of our meetings. Not every meeting since the fall has been devoted to Gordon Conwell, but certainly I think our efforts really heated up in January, and we've been working diligently ever since. At this point, I'm going to, unless someone has...
There's one more hand. It is Nancy who spoke previously.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I've been listening to you. I have been at every Zoom meeting. I've been at every consultants, townspeople meeting. I met with Gordon Conwell. I've been with the abutters, and I understand how difficult this is. You probably read my letter to you. It was long and it was vituperative. I am very concerned. This is very difficult, but it needs to be addressed very carefully. And the documents that you've posted on your website and your last meeting indicated that you had come up with density recommendations. One was called final, and it was high density. None of the others were low density. And many of them suggested that what we had come forward with and were concerned about had never been addressed. So if that's not true because of the way it was presented, I will be somewhat hopeful. However, it seems to me that there has been a large focus on how do we make money as opposed to how do we do this right. And I know there's a big gray area in between. I just want to say that we will work with you, but we need to understand clearly what your documents suggest and what the intentions are. So I thank you for going over this, but I'm still not convinced. Thank you.
Well, at this juncture, I have to apologize to Emil. I think that we should,
Just a question, because I know we've got a minute. So the map that is in our package is the same map that we looked at?
It's the same map that we
Okay.
talked
So you basically take the matrix that we were looking at last time and filled it in.
Yeah, again, this adds to the pieces of information out there. This is not all pulled together, but it's so difficult making progress at these meetings, to be honest, as a board, that if we submit the pieces and then come back to them later, once you get a chance to digest it a bit, we can then discuss it and either approve it or change it or whatever. I would just like to make one comment to the previous caller about what the planning board had configured, what you refer to as the highest density or highest intensity development. It's been an effort on the planning board to actually test the community in terms of what is the tolerance for density or intensity on the site. That was one big piece, as Marnie brought up earlier, that was missing from the early work done by the consultants, at least in my opinion. What the planning board had tried to do at that point was to do a low, medium, and high test. This was not final. This was not meant to be anything more than just something to submit to the public for feedback. So that is the purpose of what we did there. It's being taken forward to work with at this stage, and you might hear some other numbers when you read the data today, but what I will say is, as Marnie said, nothing is final on this, and all of this is up for discussion, and it will not be made final until there's approval and vetted by the public in a public setting. So whatever your interpretation is of what you're reading online, I hope you are careful about what you read, and it is not final, and it's not intended to be final. It is all for discussion purposes, but we have to put down something on paper, make a statement of how many dwelling units. Otherwise, people will not react to that. We can talk about square footage, but that doesn't resonate with most people. So in FARs, floor area ratio, forget it. That's not the way to do it either. So we're really struggling with that at this point, but I think we're a lot closer than when we started, and so there is more to come, more discussion on this. But we're being as thoughtful as we can be at this stage.
And again, it is quite random that only that one plan got posted. I don't quite know how that happened. And our apologies from the board that that's how it was posted.
And that was my point is.
Yes, and that's what I've been chanting all night long,
I
so.
don't know if it was actually captioned final, but it may have been final because it was like a third iteration of something, but nothing's final until we actually say, that's it.
So
We're done.
I think maybe you need to look at that and that what goes on and what doesn't go on and what the wording is before it's posted, because again, it's just random stuff's being thrown on there without any kind of thoughtful pattern and how it tells a story.
Right, right. That's true. If we had minutes, it would be helpful. That would tell the story.
You could watch the YouTube video.
Well, that's the only way you can
I know, I'm just
get
kidding.
the information,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we don't have anyone to take minutes for our meetings, and the minutes would be the way to go, because it would summarize what the board has done, and also have the list of documents that we consider.
Again, I think the message that we're hearing, and we already knew this, is we need to tell a story.
Right.
And we need to tell it in simple terms. a timeline, and what we're doing, and how we're doing it, and how it fits into a logical, thoughtful, careful process that people can look at and say, oh, okay, that makes sense.
That's good. And you're going to take the laboring oar and get me a draft of that. So I think that's, that. I think
If I might make one more comment, since we're still on this. I did have some conversations in the last 2 weeks with real estate people who have actually shown the hill to some corporations. And I was surprised to find that they said there was some interest, because I can't quite understand why, but it's their business, not mine. And they also said that it was their sense that any corporation that was interested in the hill would want the whole thing. And so we're devising a plan that's based on pieces. And this person sort of said, well, you know, if you're ever really going to get a corporation up there, they're not going to want to have, you know, apartments here and 40B there and townhouses here. They're going to want to have the whole thing. Now, whether they're willing to pay for the whole thing is another question. But you know, we're designing the system with flexibility, but we've also created zones. You know, this down here, that down here,
Yeah,
and it's like this is such.
We've been put in a strange position.
Right,
Yeah,
and Dr. Barnes just said we may keep, the seminary may keep a significant portion of the site. So, you know, it's really three-dimensional chess at this point.
That's just terrible.
And so I understand, though, why a corporation would want the whole site, and that's because they don't want to share septic systems or other infrastructure with any other entity.
That's just the start.
Yeah, that's
Well,
just a start, but it's a big,
Right, well, I think you can actually do both. You can divide it up, and if you said residential uses will follow this pattern, but if a buyer comes in and says they want the whole thing, then there's another process.
right. Okay, well, with apologies to Emil and anyone who, whose comments might not have been considered at this point, we will be scheduling a meeting so that we can invite the public to appear in person and everyone can have their say at that point. But at this point, I think we should go into executive session, so I will read the information that is required. So pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21, subsection A3, I, as chair, find that it's important that we go into an executive session to discuss strategy with respect to litigation, as an open meeting would be detrimental to that process. And this litigation, as everyone knows, involves Tobacco Hill Capital Partners LLC versus the Planning Board. And there are two matters, one pending in the Land Court and one pending in the Superior Court. So at this juncture, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Madam Chairman, I make the motion that we go into executive session.
Second.
Second. Okay, when I call your name, please indicate whether you're in favor. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth, her aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So at this juncture, we are going into executive session, and
You're going to cut off the feed.
we have to cut off the feed.
So just,
Yeah,
Wait,
I
wait.
have, I've notified council. She needs 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay, have we killed the rest of the feed?
Not yet. Do we have to do that officially over the,
Matthew Hamill.
executive session?